So welcome, my co-host today, Vanessa. I so appreciate your remarkable leadership and solidarity. And as always at SETSI, we begin all things by acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So welcome, Vanessa.
Mm, thank you. Oh, love that. Thank you. I feel that. I really feel that. I feel every single one of those words. And I love that so much. Thank you so much for saying that and for opening the show this way. I'm super excited to be here in this co-branded episode. I'm very excited. It's my first time doing that. And so I know we'll have a really awesome discussion. And thank you everybody for tuning in.
Indeed. So for our listeners and viewers, can you share a bit about your remarkable work and your podcast and what type of lights you're shining in this world today?
Oh, thank you. I would be happy to. So I actually host the Human Challenge, which is in 2023 was an indie podcast amplifier by Amazon Music and Acast. So very honored for that. It was at that point around 20 episodes. So I think to have 20 episodes and to be able to have that acknowledgement is really touching. And I've interviewed people from astronauts, Olympians. I've been honored to interview singers. It's a journey, honestly, and I love it because it's something that I think really I co-evolved with. It kind of started off in one way, and then I've kind of I've allowed myself to be led, and so it's really been a journey, and I'm really grateful. For me, the show is really about exploring all of the human challenges in today's world, the challenges of being human, and then how we can challenge ourselves to be more human for the greater good. So I really like to, when we talk about shining that light on people, it's how can we really harness the work and the healing that we do for ourselves, and how we can really empower the collective as well around that, right? How do we kind of we live in society, I think, where we're very I-centric, very me-centric, and we've sort of been conditioned into that. And so how do we challenge some of these notions that we know are just, not are a little bit detrimental to the collective? And so that's really what those discussions that I aim to have. And I hope that really resonates with people.
It definitely does, and I give thanks for your leadership and authenticity as always. Yeah, so I know that we said we're gonna have a conversation, so let's dig in. Yes,
Yes.
yeah. So in terms of this journey, like I know that at SETSI, a lot of our work has been around transforming the way capital flows and looking at from a lens of abundance and shining light in a different way sometimes, almost the way lightning would shine lights, like everything's dark and then lightning strikes and then you realize there's a lot out there. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Oh my, and I think that our work at SETSI has shone a light on some of the pervasive challenges that many communities face since time immemorial in various ways. So I'm not sure where you want to take this conversation, but I do know this is our first co-branded kind of conversation. So I'd love to hear where you want to go with this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really love this intersection. We're talking about flow of capital, but we're talking about abundance, right? So I really love that because it's a really large reframe. You know what I mean? Like it's really reframing what we know about money, right? We're kind of conditioned to believe that money, capital, it's a transaction, right? But it's not. It really is so much more. What is the value of our money, and how is it being distributed in our communities? How is it doing harm in the world? We're witnessing this right now in parts of the world, how money, when we're not mindful with our money and how we're using it and where it's going, it can create a lot of harm as well. And so I love when we start talking about money from this perspective of abundance, when we start looking at it from this perspective of this openness, right? This love, this compassion, because we've been taught to really separate those things. We've been taught that this is a transaction, this is a tangible thing, and because it's a tangible thing, we therefore can't fit things like love and openness and abundance and community because it's an intangible thing. And we're kind of taught these things don't mix. But I think that's really unfortunate that we're forced to have that perspective about money and this relationship with money, because on an individual level we're sort of pigeonholing ourselves, but from a collective level, from a community level, again, we're not really building equitable structures in society. And so I love that crossover a lot, and that's what really comes up for me when you ask me that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. My colleague in the States at the Decolonizing Wealth Initiative, there's a lot of work around money being
Mm.
medicine, Brother Edgar. And I couldn't agree more. But I'm always kind of duplicitous around money because like people were money at one point. It's like we're in the midst of the coldest, shortest month, Black History Month, February. And at one point, someone like myself would be of great value because of my height, my stock, my strength. So when I think about money, I think of the Berlin Conference and the partitioning and separating of Africa. The only reason why I'm able to even communicate with you right now is because the mining happening in the Congo right now with young children and the lithium being pulled out for electric cars. When I think about money, I think about the Bretton Woods Conference and how a group of only men came together and tied all monetary policy to the dollar. And then subsequently the
Mhm.
petrodollar. And then we moved into the fiat currency age where none of our money is even backed by any gold. So it's something that we agree upon. And when I think about money, I think about the military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, the school to prison pipeline. So I'm of two minds a lot of time when it comes to money because I see the abundance of money and the way money can transform communities, transform lives, transform cities, transform nations, and
Mhm.
definitely families. But I also see the roots of money and the amount of healing that individuals and the world has to go through in terms of how we store value and what we like how we connect our values with what we consider valuable. Because people
Yeah.
usually often know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. And that's deeply concerning to me in so many ways.
Yes, 100%. I hear that so much, so hard. And I actually want to say I really appreciate that historical context, of money, and because, we've got economists who are always trying to like tell us some other story. But I think to hear, what you're talking about, it's not just money's not just this economical thing. It is this cultural, it is kind of embedded in these cultural aspects as well. And so I'm really grateful for that background and that context. And I'm always open to hearing more about that, because I think that we're not allowed to talk about a lot of those things. We didn't go to school and we weren't taught economics from that perspective, right? We were taught economics as a bunch of equations and GDP, which is like probably the most inaccurate way to actually measure the prosperity of a country, and that I believe that was actually quoted by whoever is referenced as the like developer of GDP, right? Like I'm pretty sure that was the individual who was like, this is not the best measure for measuring a nation's success, but we've decided that actually it is, and to that point, I think what's interesting for me is when I look, you mentioned the military complex, and that's a big one. If we look at right now what's happening in Gaza, like it's just the atrocities, like it's heartbreaking. And I think that in particular is so challenging because we're literally seeing it like live stream. I think when we see things on the news, I always feel there's a bit of it feels more distant, but when you can see it like on your phone, on social media, like suddenly it's way more real. It's like, oh, this is right here in front of me, and this didn't happen yesterday, or this happening is probably like 20 minutes ago, and it just suddenly feels so much more real. But I bring that up because when we again and we going back to this economics piece, we have a really great opportunity right now to start redefining, what does it mean to be a rich country, right? Like, do we need to be looking at what a rich country means from the perspective of GDP, or should we be looking at what is the quality of life of people in our communities, right? How can we measure that? How can we study that, And so I kind of wish that was a perspective that was being taken by a lot of governments, by a lot of people in power that would just kind of step back and say, all right, how can we start, what's happening now? Is it, is a crisis needs to stop. We need a ceasefire. We need, hostages released, etc. But when we start looking at, countries, and we start looking at, again, like you said, what is the value of our money, not the price or the cost of abiding in a war, for example, right? Like, what is the value of this, and how can we start taking a different stance and maybe even a leadership position around changing how do we value the prosperity of our nations. And so yeah, I think that was something that really came up for me when you were in what you were saying there, and love that perspective of, you know, the price versus value. I think that's a huge question, and definitely a reframe that can be applied for us in our individual lives. But again, how do we take these concepts into these larger scale places and spaces?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I always find that like a lot of these pervasive challenges that we face globally, or even these like very intractable problems, it's not a how. Like we know how to solve our problems as people. I really feel that it's a who and a where. It's, you know, who are the thought leaders and practitioners, and where are the communities of practice and the models that can be replicated. So when you spoke about life expectancy, there's this concept called blue zones. And blue zones are all about life radius. There's places on the planets where people live very like to ripe old ages of like 100 and something, because of the air quality, because of the amount of pollution, because of the water quality, because of stress, because of taxation, because of social safety nets. And I think that I know I just got off a call, one of my colleagues from Sharon Avery from Toronto Community Foundation, and their vital signs report speaks about Toronto and that concept. And she said something remarkable. She spoke about, as opposed to having a city full of neighborhoods, a city full of good neighbors. And that really resonated with me, because I feel like if we have cities full of good neighbors, if we have countries full of good neighbors, if we have families interconnected and interdependent, it creates a dynamic where people will live longer, people will thrive, we'll have flourishing communities, as opposed to a gross, like gross. I think gross is the right word for the GDP. A gross, you know, in terms of how we frame out what prosperity and abundance looks like from a very capitalistic, colonial, imperialistic lens.
I'm just like letting all these words sit in because yes, 100%. And I love this comment of good neighbors versus good neighborhoods, because yeah, and like, again, it's this idea of it starts off with the individual and then that feeds into the collective. And you know, a lot of that comes from the healing, it comes from being trauma informed, comes from, and I think too, as trauma informed, I want to pause on that for a second, because I think that, you know, trauma informed is really just about being trauma informed is about being compassionate, right? And so that really doesn't take much. And then sometimes it just boggles me that we just think, we like almost overthink it, you know. And it's like, it just means to literally be a human being and to just live in from this place that is your heart, instead of this like fear-based, you know, stories in my mind of what I've been conditioned in fear to believe. And so but yeah, you know, I think that it comes from us at the individual level, and it has to start there. You know, we have to take our own time, do our own healing, do our own sorting, really take stock on what are the things I've been told about who I'm supposed to be, what I've been told about who I'm allowed to be, versus who am I actually, like what is this kind of truthful essence, right? Even again, I mentioned earlier this intangible versus tangible idea. We've been taught that like who I am is this tangible defined thing. What if it wasn't? What if who I am is actually this essence, right? And what if that's allowed to kind of flow every moment? And like it is, that is the truth of being human, of being ourselves, is that I'm not this defined thing, this defined person. I'm this like essence, and I can radiate at a different, let's say, frequency, you know, at any moment based off what's happening around me. And then how do we stay grounded in that? And that's okay, right? If we're not reacting to things, that becomes exhausting. But like if you're kind of grounded and accepting of this is the frequency right now, and that's okay. I'm gonna let it pass. I'm gonna just embody it for what it is, and keep moving, keep going forward, keep, you know, keep moving forward in a way that's not ignoring things, right? That's not pushing things down. But I think that reframe, you know, again, who it takes a lot of time to sort through that. And then when we start embodying that more and more and more, we start seeing how that impacts from a collective perspective. Because if each of us individually did that activity and When I say did that commit that activity, I mean being committed to that activity, because it's not this thing that you just do and here we are. It's a commitment. It's a commitment that you just continue to be as best as you can. And that's the journey in itself, right? And so when we're committed to that, we see how that impacts those around us. We see how that inspires those around us. And we see those same, what we're offering, we see that same thing coming back, not only to ourselves, but in the direction of all around us, and we start building communities that way. And so I love that sentence a lot, that whole idea of it's not good neighborhoods, it's good neighbors. And I think that a lot of times that we have to offer that reframe, because we've been taught almost, when we look at like settler colonialism, this idea of dehumanization, right? It's like, why are we talking about the neighborhoods and not the neighbors, right? That just seems that's a disconnect, I think. And that again is a conditioned disconnect that we should all be aware of as human beings.
No, I couldn't agree more. I feel you, and I feel that everything is vibrational. Everything operates on a frequency, and we struggle in this season, it seems, or these times, based off of a whole bunch of things. It could be technology, it could be just that concept of individualism that's being pushed by so many. To really have compassion, grace, mercy, empathy, gratitude. Like the amount of people I interact with, and I'm just like, do you know what's happening in Sudan? Do you know what's happening in Ethiopia? Do you know what's happening in Gaza and Israel? Like, do you know what's happened? Like, do you know that you are blessed? You woke up with running water. You woke up with family, with water. Like, so that concept of gratitude, I think, is so far removed because everything is so accessible within a click. You have access to dopamine within a, you know what I mean? Within a second, you have access to resources. So because things are so easily grasped nowadays, that concept of where did this come from? How did I attain this? Is something that folks struggle with a lot. And I feel a lot of times that sense of ingratitude that permeates not just within families and communities and nations, but because a lot of folks in the West sometimes are very and grateful for what the global South provides the West. So it's not just a linear thing. This is a global sense of ingratitude that we have. It's a generational curse, and I think that we need to be generational cures around this. Like, what does gratitude look like on a day-to-day basis? Like, how did my water come to me on my head? You know what I mean? Like, how's the roof above me staying there? You know what I mean? Like how is the air flowing into my home or my domicile? Like how, like my furniture, like the simple things. And the better we get as individuals, you know, I mean, without being too individualistic around gratitude, I think that we'll get into a place of grace and mercy and compassion, empathy. But we're going to struggle with that. And you mentioned settler colonialism, like, and the concept of just dehumanizing. Like, once again, it's Black History Month or Black Futures Month, even though Black is a misnomer. But people of African descent across the planets have been dehumanized, just like many others, for so long. Like, we went through the Ma'afa, the Great Tragedy. And up until 1967, indigenous people that look like me in Australia were considered flora and fauna. I mean, so and these are the harsh realities of living on this beautiful planet. And I think a lot of times that we when I speak to young people, there's so much uncertainty and so much anxiety about climate change, and there's a lot of trepidation, anxiety from young people sometimes just around the future. And I always try and make that distinction. And one of my goals this year is to actually, to do more youth engagement work, because that was always a passion of mine. And I find like a lot of my youth engagement work has now been completely siloed to my children, my own youth. But I think that when we talk about young people and when we talk about the future and their ability to see what's happening, there has to be a distinction between the planet and the world. And I think that's where the struggle is, because the planet Earth will be okay. Asasia, Gaia, whatever you want to call her, she'll be fine. Will civilization that we currently live in, that's very young, just to be clear. The United States, Canada, the UK, like these are very young countries. You know what I mean? Like most of the countries across, Africa, across Europe, they have not, these are not 1,000-year-old countries, none of them. So the planet Earth will be fine. Will the civilizations we exist in be okay? That's the question. And how do we find ways and means to work on our gratitude for each other and recognize the roles that we play in each other's lives, so that where there's a sense of relationship and reciprocity, where no one's on empty, where no one's just giving and giving and giving, and that's symbiotic of what the planet's been, what's happening with the planets. Like most things, and people and organizations, institutions, most things that are working on problems and solving are in a state of giving constantly, to the point where it's normalized to operate on E. You know what I mean? And I think that is something that is tragic, because it creates a dynamic where we don't appreciate what we have until time takes it away. And we don't appreciate humans, because your podcast is called The Human Challenge. We don't appreciate humans until they're gone. And I think we have to find ways and means to have that same gratitude for the planets and for so many things in our reality on a day-to-day basis, or else we'll never get to a place of grace, mercy, compassion, or any form of empathy. We'll just be operating in our small bubbles, in our small words, trying to address our own singular needs that a lot of times when you look at it, are not just selfish, are just like so disconnected to the mission and vision of what we should be doing and our purpose.
Absolutely. I feel like that. I yes. Sometimes I just don't have words. But like, yes, absolutely to all of that. Um, yes, gratitude. 100%, and the power of gratitude. When we talk about things like gratitude, even mindfulness, it's so kind of, we've really lost the cultural basis of a lot of that. I'm a 200-hour certified mindfulness meditation guide, and we've been trained in Buddhist practices, and one of the things is, what we kind of hear about, Buddhism, mindfulness from a secular perspective is the very individualized stuff, like stress reduction and all those things. And that's great. But the truth of it is a lot more social justice based, uh, Buddha talked a lot about society, community. There was one, a well-known Vietnamese monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, talked a lot about governments and people and that relationship between government and people. And so I think it's when we kind of whitewash a lot of those aspects, we've lost, like you said, like the power of gratitude, that we don't see gratitude from this collective perspective. We see gratitude as in this individualized practice. But like you said, it is this connection between me as a human being to the planet. Like, it's a connection from me as a human being to one another, to our planet, and to our world, which, like you said, are distinct. Because yes, the planet will be fine. The planet, when there's too much pressure, the planet will self-correct, and it will do what it needs to do, because she is going through survival, right? But like you said, civilization, like, when you talked about, you're bringing up indigenous peoples, and then, our African American communities, like, these are cultural people who understand relationship between earth, between spirit, whatever that looks like to you, and human beings. And then we have this settler colonization perspectives that don't understand that really dismiss that. And that disconnect, when we do not have that harmony anymore, spirit, earth will self-correct, because there's no other option. And so I love all of that. And like you said, it is that power of something like gratitude, which is not this individualized thing. It is this thing that really connects all of us together. And again, that connection between ourselves, each other, and the rest of the world, and world and planet. And it's actually, that is a concept that I really try to go through in my book Human, where what does it mean to be human? It's this: if I'm human to myself, I'm human to each other, and I'm human to the world. And that's actually, the show The Human Challenge was an extension of that concept. It's like, how do we challenge ourselves? I have also the Being Human Foundation also came out of that, right? So how do we take these principles, these concepts of like, what is it to be human, these concepts, these practices of gratitude, these commitments, right? These are like declarations. Gratitude is not this thing I do every day. It's a commitment. It's a practice. It's something I embody and do my best to embody because I'm a human being and I live in the physical world. There are things that happen all the time. I'm gonna, I'm a human, right? But it's these things that are really, really undervalued, right? Kind of coming back to that first discussion point that we were talking about, is these things that are really, really undervalued, and we have to look at them as not these things that I do, it's this thing that I am, and we cultivate that within ourselves and then with each other.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I feel that's point that you brought up around mindfulness and Buddha makes me sad, but also it makes me introspective because when I was very young, I studied the I Ching, and I feel like we have modernized certain spiritual systems and monetized, and not just modernized, but monetized them to the point where the original or the foundational principles of social justice and activism and radicalism and revolutionary thinking and is removed. And that revolutionary movement was predicated on a deep dismay for humanity and just the need for solitude. Just, you know what? Okay, y'all stay over there. I'm gonna go to the mountains and I'm gonna breathe because I see who you all are. And beautiful practice. And the monks that have the discipline, the diligence, the tenacity, the vigilance to be able to take on a practice of removal from society, I think are inspirational. And Buddha as a concept and Buddha as an individual and the teachings are more than beautiful. They're miraculous because to go through a process or a journey like that um, is a painful one. It's a painful transition and because to be able to have that level of mindfulness, you have to know the beauty in this world and the beauty in the planets, both. But I feel that in my studies, there came a point where those, philosopher queens and kings, deities that took on those practices recognized that, they reached the points of no return. The wall of human suffering was just too big to grasp or to maintain, and they had to step back and to separate. And I think right now, in terms of where our world is at, and when you see where some of the leaders are at, it's clear. And I'll take us back to this capital and resources. It's clear as day that the wrong people on the planets have access to the most capital. It is clear that the wrong people on the planet have the access to the most resources. It's clear that the wrong people on the planet have the access to the most relationships and govern how we relate, which is problematic in so many ways because they govern how we can enter relationship through the ownership of satellite dishes and technology and platforms. But I'm a firm believer, I'm an optimist by nature. And I believe, just like MLK, that the moral arc of the universe is long when it bends towards justice, but not just justice, access, indigenize, inclusion, diversity, decolonization, equity. So I'm hopeful for humanity because I believe that this journey can't be for naught. Like there's no way that we came this far to come this far, you know? And I'm a firm believer that that hero's journey that we're all in the midst of, there is gonna be that points where the right people under the right circumstances, I mean, on the right consequence or situations come together and defeat the things that have been holding us back for centuries, which are really not just people or and it's not a race thing, it's not a culture thing, it's an idea, an idea of hoarding. I mean, like we reward billionaires for hoarding capital.
Yeah.
Like, that's absurd. You know what I mean? Like we reward people for hoarding. We idolize people for hoarding things that could make the planet more balanced. So definitely there's a lot of work to be done. And I pray that the right people come together to take a stand where they can. Um, yeah, yeah, that's definitely my hope, my aim, my vision, and part of why I wake up every day and do the work that I do. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really, really beautiful. Um, really, really beautiful. And I'm just kind of letting that all sink in. I think I feel, the words that you've said is like, it's like I feel those as if that is also, my intention too. You know what I mean? But I think it's like you kind of said it in a way that I'd never really thought about it, and if that makes sense, you know what I mean? But no, I love that so much. And I think ultimately at the core of that is intentionality, right? And I'm really big on that. You're talking about like your mission, why you wake up every day. It's intentionality, right? That drives us, or maybe not even drives us, but that is the intention is what we embody, and that's what we put out, right? And I think that the more of us who again have that commitment, right? Who are committed to just truth, committed to humanity, like you said, yes, the moral compass of the earth is this is humanity always. And this is why we are always self-correcting, because or we have to respond to the self-correction, let's say, of earth, because we have not the masses have not fully understood how we can harmonize, or that's not understood, let's say, but just don't see that that's what we have to be, how we have to be living. And like you said, it's it's really entitlement. You didn't say that, but I'm kind of using that language where it's like it's that, and that's what that comes from, right? That is like when we create these conditions for separation, we believe we're entitled to this mass consumption, to this mass hoarding, and then on top of that to be rewarding for that. And so again, it is the intention. And how do we, I think the question is, how do we encourage intentionality in all of us, right? Because of the, again, the mass consumption, the fact that I can have, like you said, dopamine in the instant. I can have access to dopamine in a second, right? How do we do that? And then if we circle back on that mindfulness, it's about really slowing down. And why am I engaging in this? Why am I doing this? What is this feeding in me? And then when we start asking those questions, we start understanding how everything is connected, how we're actually not separated, how what I do right now impacts what I'm going to do in another moment, and it's going to impact the person beside me or whatever. And that was another concept I explored in my book, was like how we're all connected. We pass by each other all the time, and we consider them just as like, we don't realize these are touch points, or I'm going within your sphere of experiences all the time, when anytime you pass by somebody, right? But we're just so in our own bubble. I got to get here, I got to go there, I got to do this. We don't even realize the opportunities for connection, the embodiments that we pass through all the time, right? And so, yes, for me, what comes up is intentionality. And how do we embody intentionality? How do we heal so that there are not, when our intentions and actions don't align, that's just because of something that needs to be healed, right? And so how do we again stay committed to that journey, I think, is the question for me.
Yeah, I think knowledge of self plays a huge role, and cultural imperatives, and recognizing that we come from very sick, sometimes toxic cultures. I was born and raised in Scarborough, East Toronto, and funny enough, I look back and I realize it was a privilege to walk. So in Yoruba culture, the word for death is iku. Iku is a deity, an energy. And I walk with death from a very young age because I lost a lot of friends, if I tell you the number, it'll blow your mind, due to gun violence. And and I've had a few near-death experiences myself. And so that's removal of fear of death created a dynamic for me at a very young age where I was able to take risks and chances that many others wouldn't. in terms of how I move, how I operate, the things I build, my level of confidence in terms of will I fail or not? And do I like even if I fail, like I'm not dead. And so that concept of fear of death and walking with with that energy and knowing that death is merely a transition in terms of my spiritual practice and the consciousness of almost being an ancestral strategist, like recognizing that being a good ancestor is a strategy and focusing since I had children on my ascendants. There's a Malawi proverb that says the only thing more precious in your children is your children's children. And for at least maybe past 7 years easily, my focus has been on my grandchildren and my great grandchildren who I haven't even met yet. Um, and seeing what I can do right now in the physical flesh to make their transition onto this plane, into this world easier, or maybe not even easier, but more seamless, and have them be able to fulfill their purpose in a way that makes sense. And I feel like we need to start focusing on just that. Like a lot of folks are planning for Saturday night and Sunday. A lot of organizations are planning for Q2 and Q3 and Q4. A lot of business owners are trying to figure out, how they're going to navigate CRA March 31st. And indigenous communities, there's that 7th-generation thinking. In many cultures and communities, there's a thinking past yourself. And I think a lot of folks, their circle of reference, their frame of reference, their point of reference is so individualistic. It's what can I get done for myself today? What can I take? What can I extract? How can I receive today? As opposed to what can I give? What can I offer? How can I serve? And how can I give? How can I offer? How can I serve? And not today, but in perpetuity. Like, what are the things that I am building and constructing and working on that will, in perpetuity, serve others? Not just for today, but for tomorrow, but for generations. And that level of thinking is so hard for so many because of, once again, that scarcity mindset, that mindset of, this is all I got. You know what I mean? Like YOLO, you only live once. Like like Victor Beausolei was born in 1983. I'm 40 years old, a 20-year-old son. Like the concept of my little 40 years is so small in comparison to the dynamism of my soul and my existence. And I think that when folks start thinking of from a larger perspective, you know what I mean, in terms of who they are as a being, that essential, that the essence of who we are, and start thinking less about this ephemeral vesture, this vessel that we're in, that we spend so much time grooming and trying to make look good. I think we'll be in a better position as families, as communities, as nations, as a world. But until then, dog eat dog, man kill man, bombs dropping everywhere. Everywhere is war.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's really unfortunate. Yeah. Really, really unfortunate. It's really heartbreaking. Um, and, the reality is that the only reason that settler colonialism continues to thrive is because of dehumanization. It is the only way that humans can justify such acts of atrocities towards one another, right? Like, you know what I mean? If you just see each other as like beautiful, as a human being like me, there would be none of those harmful intentions would even arise. The only way to justify these acts is through dehumanization. And so, um, again, that intentionality piece. What am I doing now? Who am I right now? What am I? Who do I want to embody? Um, and how do I, yes, look outside of myself, step outside of myself, not just me, not just I, not just, like you said, this frame of life that I'm in from the perspective of my soul, right? If my soul's been here for eons, right? This is just a small part of that journey. And the intentionality, I also appreciated the perspective of what do I offer? What do I serve? And again, all that is language that speaks to intentionality. And I think the reason people have a tough time with that is because of fear. It's like, we're so scared of the unknown. And when you start talking about things like the life cycle of a soul, because it's like so undefined, right? People get really scared. But again, all of that is really just conditioning, because we've gone to school and to education systems that have taught us there are ways to do things. You have to be right or wrong. And, and it's not even to suggest that the idea of souls can be right or wrong, but it's more that that framework is already being conditioned into us, that we have to think that way. Right. But it's like, no, is that real? Is that expansive? Is that open? And again, I think it all just comes down to intentionality. We talked about gratitude, and I think too that curiosity, right? Allowing ourselves, permitting ourselves to just be open, to be curious, to explore, and to not have to look for these right or wrong, black or white things. That it's just like, this is kind of the human experience in this lifetime, right? And how can I make the most of it with that grander perspective, right? This is the human experience right now, but this human experience is not individualized. This human experience encompasses all of this, right? And how do I make the most of all of this, I think, is the big question.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Grazie papa for your remarkable leadership and all that you do. Do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers, our collective listeners and our viewers?
For our collective, just honestly stay committed to the journey, stay committed to openness, to gratitude. And it's hard sometimes. There's heaviness, there is stuff that's going to try and kind of push us down or distract us, and that's okay. We are human beings. But if we remember that openness, that abundance, that love always prevails, even in those moments where it doesn't feel like it really, really does. And we have to trust that openness. And I think trust that there is a larger plan at play, and we have to just allow and surrender and do it as gracefully as we can.
Absolutely. I would say the same thing. Grace, mercy, compassion, empathy, love. Those are the words. Those are the words that'll center us and ground us and move us forward as a species and help us to recognize that we're not the only species on the planet, and that we are merely custodians and stewards of land that we shouldn't own, or we try to own the way we think we should. But yeah, just grace, compassion, mercy, and love for one another. So I so appreciate you and everything that you do. And as always, we close the way we began this conversation, this beautiful conversation, by acknowledging our creator and giving thanks, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, fam. I appreciate you.
Thanks, everyone.